Policing in Black Poor and Communities. Please support our channel by shopping on our YouTube store. Thank you. In the United States, the occupation of law enforcement in Black and poor communities has been a subject of intense scrutiny and debate. This complex issue encompasses a range of historical, social, and systemic factors that have contributed to the often fraught relationship between these communities and the police. To understand this dynamic, it's crucial to delve into the historical context, explore the current realities, and discuss potential paths forward towards equitable policing practices. The origins of policing in the United States trace back to slave patrols and other mechanisms designed to control and oppress Black populations. Following the abolition of slavery, discriminatory laws and practices persisted, leading to the enforcement of segregation and other oppressive measures against Black Americans. Throughout the civil rights movement and beyond, law enforcement often played a role in upholding discriminatory laws and perpetuating violence against Black individuals and communities. Systemic racism continues to shape interactions between law enforcement and Black communities. Racial profiling, disproportionate use of force, and over-policing are persistent issues that contribute to a climate of fear and mistrust. Studies consistently show that Black individuals are more likely to be stopped, searched, arrested, and subjected to violence compared to their white counterparts, highlighting deep-seated biases within law enforcement agencies. The war on drugs disproportionately targeted Black and poor communities, resulting in mass incarceration rates that are among the highest in the world. Law enforcement tactics such as stop-and-frisk policies and aggressive policing in these areas have perpetuated cycles of poverty and incarceration. The impact of these policies extends beyond individual lives to entire communities, creating environments of instability and disenfranchisement. High-profile cases of police brutality against Black individuals, often captured on video, have fueled nationwide protests and calls for accountability. The lack of meaningful consequences for officers involved in these incidents underscores broader issues within law enforcement institutions. The qualified immunity doctrine and other legal protections make it difficult to hold officers accountable for misconduct, further eroding trust in the justice system. We will take a moment to list some of most egregious acts of violence for reference. Police brutality during civil rights protests. Law enforcement agencies across the South used excessive force against peaceful civil rights activists, including the use of police dogs, fire hoses, and batons. The violent response to nonviolent protests, such as the Birmingham Campaign in 1963 and the Selma to Montgomery marches in 1965, exposed the brutality of law enforcement towards African American demonstrators. Murder of Emmett Till. 1955. Emmett Till, a 14-year-old African American boy, was brutally murdered in Mississippi after allegedly flirting with a white woman. Despite overwhelming evidence, the two white men responsible for his death were acquitted by an all-white jury. The handling of this case by law enforcement highlighted deep-seated racial bias and injustice. War on drugs and mass incarceration. Law enforcement disproportionately targeted African American communities during the war on drugs initiated in the 1980s. This led to widespread racial profiling, aggressive policing tactics, and mass incarceration of African Americans for minor drug offenses, contributing to the destabilization of these communities. Rodney King beating. 1991. The videotaped beating of Rodney King, an African American man, by Los Angeles police officers shocked the nation. The acquittal of the officers involved in the beating sparked the 1992 Los Angeles riots, highlighting police brutality and the lack of accountability within law enforcement. Police shootings of unarmed African Americans. The deaths of numerous unarmed African Americans at the hands of law enforcement officers have sparked national outrage and protests. Cases such as the killings of Michael Brown in Ferguson, 2014, Eric Garner in New York City, 2014, Tamir Rice in Cleveland, 2014, and Breonna Taylor in Louisville, 2020, have brought attention to systemic issues of police violence and racial bias. Black Lives Matter movement. The formation of the Black Lives Matter (BLM) movement in response to police killings of African Americans has brought widespread attention to issues of police brutality and racial injustice. High-profile cases like the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, 2020, captured on video, galvanized global protests and renewed calls for police reform and accountability. Efforts to reform policing practices have led to discussions around community-oriented policing models and investments in social services. Community policing emphasizes building relationships between law enforcement and local residents, fostering trust and collaboration. Additionally, diverting resources towards mental health services, affordable housing, and education can address underlying issues that contribute to crime and social unrest. The concept of defunding the police has gained traction as a means to reallocate resources towards community services and alternative approaches to public safety. Proponents argue that investing in social programs can address root causes of crime and reduce reliance on law enforcement. Reform efforts also include revisiting use of force policies, enhancing officer training on implicit bias, and implementing civilian oversight boards to improve accountability. Addressing the occupation of law enforcement in Black and poor communities requires comprehensive and sustained action. This includes legislative reforms, increased transparency in policing practices, and meaningful engagement with affected communities. Prioritizing racial justice, investing in economic opportunities, and dismantling systemic barriers are essential steps towards building safer and more equitable communities for all residents. The occupation of law enforcement in Black and poor communities in the United States is a multifaceted issue rooted in historical injustices and perpetuated by systemic biases. Meaningful reform must address systemic racism, promote accountability, and prioritize community well-being. By challenging existing paradigms and embracing innovative approaches, we can envision a future where policing serves as a force for positive change and social justice in every neighborhood. Addressing the systemic issues surrounding law enforcement in Black and poor communities in the United States requires a multifaceted approach that encompasses policy reform, community engagement, and proactive measures to dismantle entrenched inequalities. By implementing targeted strategies, we can begin to shift towards a more just and equitable system of policing. Here are key steps to better address the systemic problem. Implementing robust police reform measures is essential to address systemic issues. This includes revising use of force policies to prioritize de-escalation techniques, enhancing officer training on implicit bias and cultural competency, and establishing transparent mechanisms for reporting misconduct. Strengthening civilian oversight boards with the authority to investigate complaints and hold officers accountable is crucial in fostering trust and accountability within law enforcement agencies. Promoting community-oriented policing models fosters trust and collaboration between law enforcement and local residents. This approach emphasizes problem-solving and crime prevention through community engagement. By assigning officers to specific neighborhoods and encouraging positive interactions with residents, law enforcement can build meaningful relationships and address public safety concerns in a proactive and respectful manner. Diverting resources from traditional law enforcement towards social services and community development is essential to address underlying factors contributing to crime and social unrest. Investing in mental health services, affordable housing, substance abuse treatment, and youth programs can reduce reliance on policing as the primary response to social issues. By addressing root causes of crime, communities can become safer and more resilient. Confronting systemic racism within law enforcement requires comprehensive and sustained efforts. This includes recruiting and retaining a diverse workforce, implementing anti-racism training for officers, and actively combating racial profiling and discrimination. Additionally, revising sentencing laws and reducing reliance on mass incarceration for nonviolent offenses can help mitigate the disproportionate impact of the criminal justice system on Black and poor communities. Advocacy at the local, state, and federal levels is crucial to enact meaningful legislative reforms. This includes advocating for the repeal of policies such as qualified immunity that shield officers from accountability, supporting legislation that promotes police transparency and accountability, and advocating for the reallocation of funds from law enforcement budgets to community services. Grassroots organizing and coalition building are effective strategies to amplify voices and influence policy change. Emphasizing restorative justice practices can promote healing and reconciliation within communities affected by systemic issues in law enforcement. Restorative justice focuses on repairing harm caused by crime through dialogue, accountability, and community involvement. By prioritizing healing and rehabilitation over punitive measures, communities can cultivate a more equitable and compassionate approach to addressing crime and conflict. Addressing systemic issues in law enforcement in Black and poor communities requires bold and sustained action across multiple fronts. By advocating for police reform, investing in community policing, redirecting resources towards social services, confronting systemic racism, advocating for legislative reforms, and embracing restorative justice practices, we can begin to dismantle entrenched inequalities and build safer, more equitable communities for all residents. Together, we have the opportunity to reimagine public safety and create a future where law enforcement serves as a force for positive change and justice. The systemic issues surrounding law enforcement in Black and poor communities can be examined through a biblical lens, particularly in relation to the concept of global government as depicted in the Bible. While the Bible does not provide a direct blueprint for modern governance or law enforcement, it offers principles and insights that can inform our understanding of justice, equity, and the responsibilities of civil authorities. In the biblical view, justice and equity are foundational principles that should guide governance and law enforcement. The book of Proverbs emphasizes the importance of justice, stating, "The Lord detests differing weights, and dishonest scales do not please him." Proverbs 20 verse 23, NIV. This highlights the biblical call for fair and impartial treatment under the law, regardless of one's socioeconomic status or background. When considering the occupation of law enforcement in marginalized communities, it is essential to uphold biblical principles of justice and ensure that all individuals are treated with dignity and fairness by civil authorities. This includes addressing systemic issues such as racial profiling, discriminatory practices, and excessive use of force that perpetuate injustice and inequality. The Bible teaches that civil authorities are appointed by God to maintain order and promote justice within society. Romans 13 verses 1-4, NIV, states, "For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer." Civil authorities, including law enforcement agencies, have a sacred responsibility to uphold the principles of justice, protect the vulnerable, and punish wrongdoing. This biblical perspective underscores the importance of accountability and ethical conduct among those entrusted with the task of enforcing laws and maintaining public safety. The biblical view of governance also emphasizes compassion and mercy towards those who are marginalized or oppressed. Micah 6 verse 8, NIV, exhorts, "He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God." When addressing systemic issues in law enforcement, it is imperative to approach solutions with a spirit of compassion and empathy. This includes advocating for policies that prioritize community well-being, invest in social services, and promote restorative justice practices that seek reconciliation and healing. The Bible does explicitly showcase a specific model of global government in Revelation 13 verses 11 to 17, but in contrast the Bible also anticipates a future where justice and righteousness will prevail under the reign of God. Revelation 21 verses 3 to 4, NIV, describes a vision of the new heaven and new earth, where God will dwell among humanity, and there will be no more death, mourning, crying, or pain. This biblical vision invites us to strive for justice and righteousness in our present context, recognizing that true governance requires a commitment to equity, peace, and the well-being of all people, especially the marginalized and oppressed. It challenges us to envision systems of governance that reflect God's heart for justice and compassion. In summary, the biblical view of government offers foundational principles that can inform our understanding of systemic issues in law enforcement, guiding us towards a vision of justice, equity, and compassion in our pursuit of transformative change within society. By applying these principles, we can work towards building a world where law enforcement serves as a force for justice and healing in marginalized communities, reflecting the values of God's kingdom on earth. I pray that you would share this message with others and believe it as well. Come quickly, Lord Jesus. Perhaps, today.